I walked into Mark's parents' dining room expecting to smell turkey and see twinkling Christmas lights. Instead, I found my husband and his best friend Jake sitting at the mahogany table like they were in some kind of business meeting. But this wasn't any normal meeting. Spread across the table where Christmas dinner should have been were official-looking papers with bold letters at the top that made my stomach drop. Divorce papers. Jake was leaning back in his chair with the biggest, nastiest smile I'd ever seen on his face. He looked like a cat that had just caught a mouse. Mark sat next to him, fidgeting with his wedding ring and avoiding my eyes completely. The Christmas tree in the corner suddenly felt like it was mocking me with its cheerful red and gold ornaments. "Merry Christmas, Maria," Jake said, his voice dripping with fake sweetness. "We have a little present for you." I stood there in my red Christmas dress, the one Mark used to say made me look beautiful. Now I felt like I was wearing a target. My hands were shaking, but I kept them steady by my sides. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. "You see," Jake continued, standing up and walking around the table like he was giving a presentation, "Mark and I made a little bet. I told him that when we handed you these papers, you'd break down crying like all women do. You'd probably beg him not to leave you, maybe even get down on your knees." Mark finally looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes that made my heart turn to ice. It wasn't sadness or regret. It was excitement. He was actually enjoying this. "Women are so predictable," Jake sneered, crossing his arms. "Especially wives like you. You think you're so smart with your little marketing job, but when push comes to shove, you're just another weak woman who can't handle being alone." The room was so quiet I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Mark's parents weren't even here. They had planned this whole thing to happen when we'd be completely alone. They wanted to watch me crumble without any witnesses who might feel sorry for me. I walked slowly to the table, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor. Both men watched me like hawks, waiting for the tears to start flowing. Jake even had his phone out, probably ready to record my breakdown so they could laugh about it later with their friends. I picked up the pen that was lying next to the papers. It was a fancy silver one, probably Mark's father's. How fitting that I'd be signing away my marriage with his family's pen. "Where do I sign?" I asked, my voice steady and calm. Jake's smile faltered for just a second. "What?" I said, "Where do I sign? These are divorce papers, right? So where's my signature supposed to go?" Mark's mouth fell open. "Maria, don't you want to... shouldn't we talk about this?" I flipped through the pages, scanning for the signature lines. "Talk about what? You've clearly made up your mind. You even got your friend here to make bets about how I'd react. So let's just get this over with." Jake recovered quickly, his nasty smile returning. "See? I told you she'd try to act tough at first, but just wait. The tears are coming." I found the first signature line and signed my name in clear, bold letters. Then the second page, then the third. With each signature, I watched Jake's confidence start to crack. Mark looked like he was seeing a ghost. When I finished signing the last page, I set the pen down and reached into my purse. Both men leaned forward, probably expecting me to pull out tissues for the crying fit they were still waiting for. Instead, I pulled out a thick manila envelope and slid it across the table toward them. "Since we're exchanging Christmas gifts," I said with a smile that made both of their faces go completely white, "I have something for you too. What do you think was in Maria's envelope? Drop your guesses in the comments below and don't forget to hit that subscribe button because this story is just getting started. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next." 3 months earlier, I was still living the lie that my marriage was perfect. Every morning, I woke up at 6 to make Mark's coffee exactly how he liked it. 2 sugars, a splash of cream, served in his favorite blue mug. I'd pack his lunch in the same brown bag, write little notes that said, "Have a great day," and stick them inside like I was still the loving wife I used to be. But something had changed in Mark. It started small, like when he stopped saying thank you for dinner or when he'd roll his eyes if I tried to tell him about my day at work. Then it got worse. Much worse. "Maria, this chicken is dry," he'd say, pushing his plate away like I'd served him garbage. Can't you do anything right anymore? I'd apologize and offer to make him something else, even though the chicken was perfectly fine. I told myself he was just stressed from work. That's what good wives do, right? They make excuses for their husbands. The house had to be spotless when he came home. I'd spend my evenings after work scrubbing floors that were already clean and organizing closets that were already organized. If Mark found even one dish in the sink or one pillow out of place on the couch, he'd shake his head and mutter about how I was getting lazy. My mom never left the house looking like this, he'd say, even when everything was perfect. Jake started coming over more often during this time. They'd sit in the living room drinking beer and talking in low voices that would stop the moment I walked into the room. Sometimes I'd catch them looking at me and then laughing about something I couldn't hear. "Hey, Maria," Jake would call out when I was in the kitchen cleaning up after them. "Bring us some more beer, would you? And maybe some of those chips from the pantry." I wasn't his servant, but I'd do it anyway because I didn't want to cause problems. Mark never told Jake to get his own beer. He never stood up for me at all. The worst part was how Mark started talking to me like I was stupid. I have a college degree and a good job in marketing, but he'd explain simple things to me like I was a child. "Maria, when you're at the grocery store, you need to check the expiration dates on the milk," he'd say slowly, like I'd never bought groceries before in my life. "I know how to buy milk, Mark." "Do you? Because last time you brought home milk that expired 2 days later. That's not very smart shopping." The milk had been fine. It lasted a whole week. But I stopped arguing because it never got me anywhere except more lectures about how I needed to pay better attention to things. Then came the night that changed everything. Mark had fallen asleep on the couch after drinking too much with Jake, and his phone kept buzzing with text messages. I was going to turn it off so the noise wouldn't wake him up, but I saw Jake's name on the screen. The messages made my blood turn cold. "Dude, your wife is so pathetic," Jake had written. "The way she runs around trying to please you is embarrassing." Mark had replied, "I know, right? She's too stupid to realize I'm done with her, but it's kind of fun watching her try so hard. You should just divorce her already. Put her out of her misery. Soon. I'm working on something. She's going to be so shocked when it happens. Women like Maria never see it coming because they're too busy playing house to notice what's really going on." I sat there in my kitchen, reading message after message where my husband and his best friend made fun of everything about me. My cooking, my appearance, my intelligence, even the way I laughed. They called me pathetic and too stupid to leave, and joked about how easy it would be to get rid of me. That's when I realized my marriage wasn't just over. It had been over for a long time, and I'd been the only one trying to save something that was already dead. But instead of confronting Mark about the messages, I put his phone back exactly where I found it and went upstairs to our bedroom. As I lay there staring at the ceiling, I started planning something that would make both of them regret ever underestimating me. The Monday after I found those horrible text messages, I did something I never thought I'd do. I called a private investigator. My hands were shaking as I dialed the number I'd found online, and I almost hung up 3 times before someone finally answered. "Rodriguez Investigations. This is Carmen speaking." "Hi, I think I need help," I whispered into the phone, even though Mark was at work and couldn't hear me. Carmen Rodriguez turned out to be exactly what I needed. She was a former police detective who specialized in cheating spouses and financial crimes. When I met her at a small coffee shop downtown, she looked like someone's grandmother, but her eyes were sharp and serious. "Tell me everything," she said, pulling out a small notebook. I explained about the text messages, about how Mark had been treating me, and about my suspicions that something bigger was going on. Carmen listened without judging me, taking notes and asking questions that made me realize I'd been ignoring red flags for months. "Your husband has been staying out late more often?" she asked. "Yes, almost every night. He says he's with Jake, but they're always vague about where they go." "And you mentioned money issues?" That's when I told her about the credit card bills I'd been finding. Charges for expensive dinners at restaurants I'd never been to, hotel rooms in our own city, and cash advances that Mark claimed were for business expenses. When I asked him about them, he'd get angry and tell me to stop questioning his spending. "I handle the money in this family, Maria," he'd snap. "You don't need to worry about things you don't understand." But I did understand. I understood that money was disappearing from our accounts faster than Mark's salary could replace it. I understood that he was lying to me about where he was going and what he was doing. I just didn't know how bad it really was. Carmen's investigation started immediately. She followed Mark and Jake for 2 weeks, taking pictures and recording their activities. What she discovered was so much worse than just an affair or even emotional abuse. Mark and Jake were running a scam. They'd been targeting elderly people at coffee shops and community centers, convincing them to invest in fake companies that promised huge returns. They'd show these poor people official-looking documents and websites that Jake had created, making everything look legitimate. "Your husband and his friend have stolen over $200,000 from at least 15 different victims," Carmen told me when we met again. "Most of these people are retired and living on fixed incomes. They've lost their life savings." I felt sick to my stomach. The man I'd been married to for 8 years was a criminal. He was stealing from grandparents and elderly couples who trusted him because he looked respectable in his business suits. But that wasn't even the worst part. Carmen had also discovered that Mark was planning to divorce me and disappear with all the stolen money. He'd been moving our joint savings into accounts I didn't know about, slowly draining everything we'd built together: the house, the car, even my grandmother's jewelry that I'd inherited. He was planning to take it all. "There's more," Carmen said, sliding a folder across the table. "Your husband has been telling people that you're mentally unstable. He's been setting up a story that you're having a breakdown so that when he divorces you, no one will believe anything you say about his crimes." Inside the folder were printed emails between Mark and Jake, where they discussed their plan in detail. They were going to serve me divorce papers and record my reaction, then use the video to show everyone how crazy I was. They thought if I looked unstable enough, no one would listen if I tried to expose their scam. "He's been planning this for months," Carmen explained. "The goal is to leave you with nothing while he and Jake disappear with all the stolen money. They've already picked out a place in Mexico where they plan to live." I sat there staring at the evidence, feeling like my whole world had collapsed. But underneath the shock and hurt, something else was growing. Something that felt like fire in my chest. If Mark wanted to play games, I was going to show him what a real player looked like. While Mark thought I was just a housewife who happened to have a little marketing job, I was actually building something that would change my life forever. It started 6 months earlier when my sister Emma called me with an idea that seemed crazy at the time. "Maria, you're wasting your talents working for someone else," Emma had said during one of our weekly coffee dates. "You know more about marketing than most people with fancy degrees. Why don't you start your own business?" I'd laughed it off at first. With what money? Mark handles all our finances and he'd never agree to me starting a company. "Then don't tell him," Emma said simply. "At least not yet. Start small, work from home, and see what happens." That's how I met David Chen, a web developer who was looking for a marketing partner. Emma had introduced us through her law firm, where David was a client trying to grow his tech consulting business. He was nothing like Mark, quiet, respectful, and genuinely interested in my ideas. "I've been trying to market my services for 2 years," David told me during our first meeting at a small cafe downtown. "I'm good with computers, but I'm terrible at explaining to people why they need my help." That's where I came in. I created a complete marketing strategy for David's business, designing everything from his website to his social media presence. Within 3 months, his client list had tripled. He was so grateful that he offered me something I never expected. "Maria, I want you to be my business partner," he said. "Not just someone I hire for marketing. A real partner. 50-50 ownership of everything we build together." I was scared to say yes. Mark had spent years telling me I wasn't smart enough to run my own business, that I should be grateful for my little marketing job and not reach for things beyond my abilities. but something inside me knew this was my chance to prove him wrong. We started Chen Martinez Digital Solutions with just $5,000 that I'd saved from my regular job without Mark knowing. I told him I was working late at the office when I was actually meeting with clients and building our company. Emma helped us set up all the legal paperwork, making sure everything was properly registered and protected. The business grew faster than either David or I had imagined. We specialized in helping small businesses create strong online presences, and word spread quickly about our results. Within 4 months, we had 20 clients. Within 6 months, we had 50. David handled all the technical work while I managed marketing, client relations, and business development. We made a perfect team. He respected my ideas, listened to my suggestions, and never once made me feel stupid or small. Working with him reminded me what it felt like to be valued for my mind instead of criticized for every little mistake. "You're brilliant at this," David would say when I'd present a new marketing campaign. "I don't know how you come up with these ideas, but they work every time." The money started coming in faster than I could count it. We were charging premium prices because we delivered premium results. By the time Carmen was investigating Mark's crimes, our company was worth over $2 million, and my personal share was sitting in accounts that Mark knew nothing about. But the business success was just part of my plan. While researching our legal structure with Emma, I discovered something interesting about the house Mark and I lived in. When we'd bought it 8 years ago, Mark had been having credit problems from some bad investments. To get the mortgage approved, we'd put the house entirely in my name. Mark had completely forgotten about this detail, but I hadn't. Legally, the house was mine. All of it. Emma helped me quietly transfer other assets into my name as well. The car we'd bought last year, I was the primary owner because of my better credit score. Our joint savings account? I moved my half into a separate account, which was perfectly legal since it was my money too. "You're not stealing anything," Emma assured me. "You're just protecting what's already yours." By the time Mark was planning his Christmas ambush, I owned a successful business, had over $1 million in personal assets, and held legal ownership of almost everything he thought he was going to take from me. He had no idea that the woman he was planning to destroy had already built herself an empire. 2 weeks before Christmas, I overheard a phone conversation that made my blood boil. Mark was in his home office talking to Jake, and he thought I was upstairs wrapping presents. But I was standing right outside his door, listening to every disgusting word. "Christmas Day is perfect," Mark was saying, his voice full of excitement. "She'll never see it coming. Maria loves Christmas more than any other holiday. She's been planning this big dinner for weeks." Jake's laughter came through the phone speaker. "Dude, that's evil. I love it. She's going to be so crushed." "That's the point. I want her completely broken down so she won't fight the divorce terms. If she's crying and begging, she'll sign whatever I put in front of her." My hands clenched into fists as I listened to them plan my humiliation like it was some kind of game. "And you're sure about the bet?" Jake asked. $50 says she'll be sobbing within 5 minutes, Mark replied. "Women like Maria are so predictable. She'll probably throw herself at my feet and beg me not to leave her. It's going to be pathetic." "I should record it," Jake suggested. "We could show it to the guys at poker night. They'd get a kick out of seeing the Ice Queen finally melt." "Do it, but make sure you get her face when she realizes her perfect little life is over. I want to see that moment when she understands that she's going to lose everything." They spent another 20 minutes discussing their plan in detail. Mark's parents were going to be conveniently absent, visiting his aunt in another state. The house would be empty except for the 3 of us. They'd set up the divorce papers on the dining room table like a twisted Christmas present, complete with a pen for me to sign with. "The best part," Mark continued, "is that she has no idea what's coming. She's been acting like everything is normal, cooking my meals and cleaning the house like a good little wife. She actually thinks our marriage is fine." If only he knew that I'd been planning my own surprise for months. After hearing that conversation, I called Carmen immediately. "They're planning to serve me divorce papers on Christmas Day," I told her. "They want to record my reaction and humiliate me." "Perfect," Carmen said, which surprised me. Let them think they're in control. Meanwhile, we'll be ready with our own surprise. That's when Carmen introduced me to her friend Marcus Webb, an investigative journalist who specialized in exposing financial crimes. Marcus had been looking for a story about scams targeting elderly people, and Mark and Jake's operation was exactly what he needed. If you can get them to confess on camera, we can bring down their entire operation, Marcus explained during our secret meeting. But we need solid evidence of them admitting to the crimes. I had an idea that was risky, but perfect. What if I wear a hidden camera to the Christmas dinner? They're planning to record me anyway, so they won't be suspicious of any recording equipment in the room. Carmen loved the plan. She gave me a tiny camera that looked like a button on my dress and a small recording device that would capture everything they said. The plan was simple. Let them serve me the divorce papers, sign them calmly to throw them off guard, and then present them with my own surprise. But my surprise wasn't just going to be evidence of their crimes. Emma had been working overtime to prepare something special. Divorce papers of my own that would give me everything and leave Mark with nothing but his debts and legal troubles. Since the house is in your name and you can prove he's been stealing from joint accounts, you have grounds to claim everything, Emma explained. Plus, once his criminal activity comes to light, no judge will side with him. I spent the week before Christmas acting like nothing had changed. I bought Mark expensive presents, planned the perfect Christmas dinner menu, and even hummed Christmas carols while decorating the house. He had no idea that every smile I gave him was part of my plan. The night before Christmas, as I lay in bed next to my soon-to-be ex-husband, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Excitement. Tomorrow, Mark and Jake thought they were going to destroy me. Instead, I was going to destroy them. Mark and Jake stared at the manila envelope like it might explode. The confident smirks they'd worn just moments before had completely disappeared from their faces. Mark's hand was shaking as he reached for the envelope, and Jake had gone so pale I thought he might faint. "What is this?" Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Open it and find out," I said, settling back in my chair like I was about to watch my favorite movie. "Consider it my Christmas gift to both of you." Jake tried to get his cocky attitude back. "Whatever game you're playing, Maria, it's not going to work. You just signed divorce papers. You have no power here." I laughed, and the sound made both men jump. "No power? That's interesting. Mark, why don't you tell Jake about our house? You know, the one that's entirely in my name because of your credit problems 8 years ago?" Mark's face went white. He'd completely forgotten about that detail, just like I knew he would. "That's impossible," Jake said, but his voice wasn't confident anymore. "Open the envelope," I repeated. "Trust me, you're going to want to see what's inside." Mark's hands were trembling as he tore open the envelope and pulled out the contents. The first thing he saw was a stack of photographs. His mouth fell open as he flipped through them. Pictures of him and Jake meeting with elderly people. Pictures of them at the bank depositing checks. Pictures of them celebrating at expensive restaurants with money they'd stolen. "Where did you get these?" Mark demanded. "Keep looking," I said calmly. "There's more." The next item was a thick folder full of printed documents. Bank records showing exactly how much money they'd stolen and where it had gone. Copies of the fake investment documents they'd used to trick their victims. Screenshots of text messages between them discussing their crimes and laughing about the people they'd hurt. Jake grabbed the folder from Mark's hands, his eyes getting wider with each page he read. "This is... How did you..." "I hired a private investigator 2 months ago," I explained. "Carmen Rodriguez. Former police detective, very good at her job. She's been following you both and documenting everything you've done." But I wasn't finished. I pulled out my phone and showed them the recording app that had been running the entire time. "I've also been recording this whole conversation, including the part where you admitted to making bets about my reaction and planning to humiliate me. And Jake, remember when you said women are predictable? That's going to sound really interesting to the FBI." Mark looked like he was going to be sick. "FBI? Oh yes, They're very interested in your little investment scam. Stealing money from elderly people is a federal crime, Mark. You and Jake are looking at serious prison time. I reached into the envelope and pulled out one more document, a thick stack of papers with official letterhead. These are divorce papers too, I said, sliding them across the table. But these are the ones that actually matter. The ones I had my lawyer sister prepare. Since our house is in my name, and since you've been stealing from our joint accounts to fund your criminal activities, I get to keep everything. The house, the cars, the savings accounts, all of it. Jake was frantically flipping through the evidence, looking for some way out. You can't prove we did anything wrong. These could be fake. I smiled and pulled out my final surprise. A business card. This belongs to Marcus Webb. He's an investigative journalist who specializes in financial crimes. He's been working with Carmen to expose scams exactly like yours. In fact, he's writing a story about you both that should be published next week. I'm sure your employers will be very interested to read it. Mark finally found his voice. Maria, please, we can work this out. I'll call off the divorce. We can go to counseling. Too late for that, I said, standing up from the table. You see, while you two were planning to destroy my life, I was building a new one. I own a successful business worth over $2 million. I have my own money, my own house, and my own future. I don't need you anymore, Mark. I never really did. The room was completely silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock. Both men sat there staring at the evidence of their crimes, finally understanding that they'd been completely outplayed. Merry Christmas, I said, walking toward the door. Enjoy explaining all of this to the police. 6 months later, I was sitting in my beautiful new home office looking out at the garden I'd planted myself. The morning sun was streaming through the windows, and I could hear birds singing in the oak tree I'd had planted last month. Everything was peaceful, quiet, and completely mine. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Did you see the news this morning? I opened the link she sent and smiled. There was Mark's mugshot on the local news website with the headline, Local Man Sentenced to 5 Years for Elder Fraud. The article explained how he and Jake had been found guilty of stealing over $300,000 from elderly victims. Jake got 7 years because he was considered the mastermind of the operation. It turned out that once the FBI started investigating, they found even more victims than Carmen had discovered. 15 elderly people had lost their life savings to Mark and Jake's fake investment scheme. During the trial, I watched from the back of the courtroom as victim after victim told their stories. One elderly woman cried as she explained how she'd lost the money she'd saved to pay for her husband's cancer treatment. Mark had tried to blame everything on Jake, claiming he was just following his friend's lead. But the evidence was too strong. The text messages, the bank records, the recordings I'd made. Everything painted a clear picture of two men who thought they were smarter than everyone else. The divorce had been finalized within 3 months. Mark's lawyer tried to fight for half of our assets, but once the criminal charges came to light, no judge was willing to side with him. I kept the house, the cars, and everything else we'd built together. Mark was left with nothing but legal bills and a criminal record. My business with David had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. Chen Martinez Digital Solutions now had over 100 clients and 15 employees. We'd moved into a real office building downtown, and I had my own corner office with my name on the door. David and I had become more than business partners, too. We'd been dating for 4 months, and he treated me like I was the most important person in the world. You're amazing, he'd tell me when I'd close a big deal or come up with a brilliant marketing campaign. I'm so lucky to work with someone as talented as you. It was strange how different my life felt when someone actually respected my intelligence instead of constantly putting me down. David asked for my opinions, listened to my ideas, and never once made me feel small or stupid. We were equals in every way. The house Mark and I had shared was sold within a month of the divorce. I used the money to buy a smaller but much more beautiful home in a quiet neighborhood where I could start fresh. Every room was decorated exactly how I wanted it, with bright colors and comfortable furniture that made me smile every time I walked through the door. I'd also done something that felt incredibly good. I'd used some of my business profits to help the elderly victims of Mark and Jake's scam. Working with Emma, I'd set up a fund to help them recover some of their losses. It couldn't give them back everything they'd lost, but it was something. Sometimes I thought about that Christmas dinner and how different everything could have been if I'd reacted the way Mark and Jake expected. If I'd cried and begged, if I'd signed their papers without fighting back, I'd probably be living in some tiny apartment right now, struggling to pay bills while they lived it up in Mexico with stolen money. Instead, I was successful, independent, and genuinely happy for the first time in years. The best part was that I'd learned something important about myself. I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. All those years of Mark telling me I was weak and stupid had been lies designed to keep me under his control. The truth was that I was smart enough to build $1 million business, brave enough to take down criminals, and strong enough to completely rebuild my life. As I sat in my office that morning, planning the next phase of my business expansion, I realized that Mark had actually done me a favor. By trying to destroy me, he'd forced me to discover just how powerful I really was. And that was the greatest gift of all.